First story, the last shift. I've worked as a paramedic for almost a decade now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Births in the back of an ambulance, gruesome car crashes, even the occasional heart attack at a Christmas dinner. But nothing. Not the long hours, not the adrenaline, not the camaraderie. Could have prepared me for what happened last year on Christmas Eve. The memory still clings to me like frostbite, numbing parts of my life I'll never fully feel again. I'm sharing this now not because I want to, but because I need to. Maybe writing it down will make it feel less real. It was a bitterly cold night in Augusta, Maine. Snow coated the streets, and the kind of quiet that only small towns know had settled in. The station was empty except for me, my partner Lisa, and an EMT in training named Kevin. We were the skeleton crew for the holiday shift. Around 10:15 p.m., the radio crackled. It wasn't the usual dispatch voice. It sounded rushed, almost panicked. Unit 47, we have a 10-54 in progress. Caller reports male cardiac arrest, rural location, approximately 15 miles north of city limits. Address is 382 Ridge Hollow Road. Confirm receipt. Lisa and I exchanged a glance. A cardiac arrest in the middle of nowhere on Christmas Eve. Of course. Kevin, eager to prove himself, grabbed the keys to the rig before Lisa or I could. "Let's save Christmas, huh?" he said with a grin. I didn't grin back. Something about the tone of that dispatch didn't sit right with me. The drive to Ridge Hollow Road felt endless. Snow was falling harder now, turning the unplowed roads into a treacherous obstacle course. Kevin drove slowly, gripping the wheel with white knuckles, while Lisa fiddled with the GPS. "Are we even close?" I asked. Lisa frowned. "It's weird. The map shows the road, but the address doesn't seem to exist. Maybe it's one of those places you can't see from the main road," Kevin said. Sure enough, just as we were about to give up, Lisa spotted a narrow dirt path winding into the trees. A small, weathered sign next to it read Ridge Hollow. We bumped down the trail for what felt like ages before the cabin finally came into view. It was old, almost cartoonishly so, with a sagging roof and peeling paint. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney. The porch light was on, casting a faint yellow glow on the snow. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, clutching a shawl around her frail shoulders. "He's in here," she called, her voice trembling. "Please hurry. Inside." The air was stiflingly warm. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, but it couldn't mask the coppery scent of blood. The man, her husband, I presumed, was slumped in an armchair by the fire. His face was pale, his lips slightly parted. Rigor hadn't set in yet, but he was gone. Lisa knelt beside him, checking for a pulse while I asked the woman questions. "What happened?" We were arguing," she said, her hands fluttering like moths. He clutched his chest and fell back. "But he was still alive when I called you. I swear he was." Something about her tone made my skin crawl. It wasn't grief. It was desperation. Lisa shook her head at me. "No pulse. No chance of resuscitation." "Ma'am," I began, "I'm sorry, but your husband is..." Before I could finish, Kevin, who had been standing by the fireplace, spoke up. Guys? You might want to see this." Kevin was holding a framed photograph, one of several lining the mantel. It showed a family, an older couple with 2 children, a boy and a girl. But it wasn't the family that caught my attention. It was the man. He looked just like Kevin. Same curly hair, same crooked smile. "That's weird," Kevin muttered, setting the photo down. I glanced at the other pictures. Most were black and white or sepia-toned, but in every single one, the faces seemed eerily familiar. One photo in particular made my stomach drop. It showed a woman with sharp cheekbones and piercing eyes, wearing a paramedic uniform. She looked exactly like Lisa. The old woman watched us, her expression unreadable. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Before I could answer, a muffled thud came from somewhere below us. "What was that?" Lisa asked. The woman's face darkened. I don't know. The house. It's been making noises lately. Kevin grabbed a flashlight. I'll check it out. I don't think that's a good idea, I said, but he was already heading toward the basement door. The rest of us followed, descending the creaking stairs into the damp, musty darkness. The flashlight beam swept across shelves lined with jars of preserves and dusty old tools. Then we saw it. A trail of wet, red footprints leading deeper into the basement. Kevin, I whispered, get back up here, but Kevin was transfixed. He followed the footprints to a large wooden chest in the corner. The lid was slightly ajar. Don't, I started, but it was too late. He lifted the lid, and in an instant, the flashlight went out. The darkness was absolute. I heard Kevin scream, and then nothing. Kevin? Lisa called, her voice trembling. Silence. When the light came back on, the chest was empty, and Kevin was gone. Panic set in. Lisa and I bolted up the stairs, but the old woman was waiting for us. Her kindly facade was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory smile. You shouldn't have come here, she said. The lights flickered, and I swear I heard voices, low and guttural, whispering in a language I didn't understand. Lisa grabbed my arm. We need to go. Now. We ran for the ambulance, leaving the woman and the body behind. Lisa jumped into the driver's seat, and I fumbled with the radio trying to call for help. But the radio only emitted static. Then, as Lisa started the engine, she gasped. What? I asked. She pointed to the windshield. In the snow, written in dripping red letters, were the words, "You can't leave." I don't remember much after that. Just fragments. The ambulance skidding on the icy road, the siren wailing, Lisa screaming. I woke up in a ditch alone. When I stumbled into the police station hours later, they listened to my story with skeptical eyes. When I mentioned the cabin, one of the officers frowned. Ridge Hollow? That place burned down 20 years ago. A couple died there on Christmas Eve. I thought it was a joke. But when they drove me back to the site, all that remained was a charred foundation buried under the snow. The ambulance was found abandoned on the highway, its interior smeared with bloody handprints. Lisa and Kevin were never seen again. And me? I haven't worked a night shift since. Second story, unwanted visitor. Christmas Eve in the suburbs of Carmel, Indiana, always felt like something out of a postcard. Snow blanketed the yards, lights twinkled from every house on the block, and the faint sound of carolers carried through the crisp night air. My family, the Thompsons, was no exception. We had a cozy routine. Dinner together, Christmas movies, and then tucking the kids into bed, leaving the anticipation of morning hanging like magic in the air. That night, everything started as usual. My wife, Karen, was finishing the dishes in the kitchen while I read The Night Before Christmas to our 7-year-old son, Jack, and 5-year-old daughter, Emily. The kids were buzzing with excitement, begging to leave extra cookies for Santa. After they finally fell asleep, Karen and I wrapped the last of the presents, sipping wine by the glow of the tree. Around 11:30, she headed upstairs, and I lingered to do my usual check of the house. I locked the front door, secured the sliding glass door in the kitchen, and peeked out the window to make sure our cars were locked. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the snow leading up to our front porch. At first, I figured it must have been the mailman dropping off a late package or a neighbor stopping by to leave a card. But then it struck me. There was only one set of prints leading to the porch, none leading away. I opened the door cautiously, cold air biting at my skin. The snow on the porch was undisturbed, yet the prints stopped right at the bottom step. I squinted into the darkness, half expecting to see someone hiding in the bushes, but there was nothing. Karen called down, asking if everything was okay. I didn't want to worry her. Just checking the locks, I lied, closing the door and double bolting it. I convinced myself it was probably a prank. Maybe one of the teenagers in the neighborhood trying to spook people. But as I climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. At 2:17 a.m., I woke to Karen shaking my arm. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I think someone's downstairs." I listened. At first, there was nothing but the faint hum of the heater. Then, from below us, a sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept in the closet and motioned for Karen to stay put. As quietly as I could, I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The living room was dark except for the colorful glow of the Christmas tree. Everything looked normal. The presents were still under the tree. The stockings still hung on the mantel. But then I saw it. On the kitchen counter was a folded piece of paper. I inched closer, gripping the bat tightly. The note read, "I like your tree. See you next year." Karen was terrified when I showed her the note. We checked every lock, every window, but nothing was broken or out of place. In the morning, after the kids had torn through their presents and the initial panic had dulled, I convinced myself that it had to be a joke. Maybe I left a door unlocked, and some bored kid decided to mess with us. Then Karen turned the note over. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the back of a photograph, and the photograph was of us. All four of us, asleep in our beds. The police came that afternoon. They dusted for fingerprints, searched the property, and canvassed the neighborhood, but there were no signs of forced entry and no witnesses. The officer in charge gave me a tired look as he handed back the photo. "Honestly, Mr. Thompson, it's probably just a prank. Kids these days do some weird stuff for attention." I didn't believe that. The photo was too intimate, too deliberate. Whoever had taken it had been inside our house. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. I installed security cameras, replaced the locks, and even bought a dog. A big, intimidating German Shepherd we named Max. But as Christmas approached the following year, my anxiety grew. On Christmas Eve, I made sure everything was locked tight. Max patrolled the house, and the cameras recorded every corner of the property. We went to bed around midnight. By morning, everything seemed fine. The kids were thrilled to find Santa's gifts under the tree, and for a brief moment, I let myself believe that the previous year had been a fluke. Then Karen found the second note. It was sitting on the dining table, right next to the plate of half-eaten cookies we'd left out for Santa. This one read, "Thanks for the cookies. Max is a good boy. See you next year." Karen turned pale. "Mark, how would they know the dog's name?" We checked the cameras. Every single file had been erased. Every Christmas Eve after that, the notes came. They were never left in the same spot twice. One year it was in Jack's school backpack. Another time it was tucked into Karen's jewelry box. Each note was more invasive, more personal. They mentioned things only someone inside the house would know. The argument Karen and I had over money, Emily's favorite bedtime story, Jack's fear of the dark. We moved houses twice, each time farther away from the last. But the notes followed us no matter where we went. Last year, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I stayed up all night on Christmas Eve, every light in the house blazing, Max at my side. Karen and the kids slept upstairs, unaware of my plan. At 3:12 a.m., Max started growling. His ears pinned back, and he stared at the front door. I gripped the bat, my palms sweating. "Who's there?" I shouted. No answer. Then I heard it. A faint, almost playful knock. 3 soft taps. I flung the door open, ready to swing. But there was no one there. On the porch was a single piece of paper, weighted down with a small rock. This one didn't say, "See you next year." It said, "I'm already inside. 3rd story shadows at the window." I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's to make sense of what happened, though I'm not sure I ever will. Or maybe it's because if I don't put it down, it'll eat away at me forever. It was Christmas Eve 2021, and Vermont was in the grip of a brutal winter storm. My daughter, Emily, and I had planned a quiet holiday at home. It wasn't much. Just the 2 of us since her father and I had divorced earlier that year. The snow started falling heavily around mid-afternoon, blanketing the countryside and muting the world outside. By 6, the power was out. I lit a few candles, stoked the fire in the living room, and told Emily we'd make it an adventure. Santa's gonna have a hard time landing in this weather, I joked, trying to keep things light. Emily giggled, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She was 7, old enough to sense my nervousness but still young enough to believe in the magic of Christmas. We sang carols by candlelight, her voice soft and sweet against the crackle of the fire. It was peaceful, almost cozy, until Emily stopped mid-verse and turned toward the window. "Mommy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who's that man outside?" I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. "What man, sweetie?" She pointed to the large bay window behind the couch, her finger trembling slightly. I got up, my stomach knotting as I walked over. The snow was coming down hard, the wind whipping against the glass, making it nearly impossible to see anything outside. I peered out, squinting into the swirling white. "There's no one there, Em," I said, forcing a smile. "But I saw him," she insisted. "He was standing right there, looking at us." I glanced again, more carefully this time, but all I saw was our reflection in the glass. My pale face and Emily's wide, worried eyes. "Sometimes shadows can play tricks on us," I said, pulling the curtains closed. "Don't worry, honey, it's just the storm." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded and sat back down. An hour later, Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, her rabbit tucked under her arm. The fire was dying down, and I debated whether to add more wood or just head to bed. That's when I saw it. On the window pane, where the frost had crept along the edges, there was a faint pattern. A patch of fogged glass, as if someone had been breathing on it from the outside. My chest tightened. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe a draft or a trick of the cold. But deep down, I knew better. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. Then I grabbed the poker from the fireplace and sat in the armchair, keeping watch. The house was silent except for the wind howling outside. And then I heard it, a faint crunching sound, like footsteps in the snow, circling the house. For the next hour, I sat there, clutching the poker, my ears straining for every sound. The footsteps would stop, then start again, moving from one side of the house to the other. Occasionally, there was a soft tap on a window, like fingers brushing against the glass. At one point, I worked up the courage to peek through the curtains in the kitchen. The snow had let up slightly, and I could see the yard illuminated by the dim glow of the moon. There were footprints in the snow. They circled the house, overlapping in places, as if whoever made them had been pacing for hours. I tried calling the police, but the storm had knocked out the phone lines. My cell phone had no signal either. I considered waking Emily and trying to make a run for the car, but the thought of stepping outside into the darkness, knowing someone was out there, sent a wave of panic through me. So I stayed put, watching, waiting. The footsteps eventually stopped, but I couldn't bring myself to relax. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made me jump. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I must have dozed off. When I woke, the first pale light of dawn was seeping through the curtains. The house was eerily quiet. "Emily?" I called, my voice hoarse. There was no answer. I jumped up, heart pounding, and ran to the couch. The blanket was still there, but Emily was gone. "Emily!" I screamed, tearing through the house, checking every room, every closet. The doors were still locked, the windows still shut. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. I stumbled outside, barefoot in the snow, screaming her name. That's when I saw it. A new set of footprints leading away from the house. They didn't go far, just to the edge of the yard, where the snow was trampled in a large, uneven circle. In the middle of the circle was her stuffed rabbit, half buried in the snow. When the police arrived later that morning, they found no signs of forced entry, No evidence of a struggle. Just the footprints, circling the house, stopping at every window and door. The official report said it was likely an abduction, though they couldn't explain how the intruder had gotten in or out without leaving a trace. I stayed in that house for another year, hoping, praying for answers, but none ever came. Every Christmas Eve since, I've heard the footsteps again. They circle the house, slow and deliberate, stopping at the windows. And every year, I wonder if they'll finally come inside for me. Fourth story lights on the road. I'm not sure if I'll ever fully understand what happened that night. People tell us it's just stress, or maybe even hypothermia. But Lisa and I know better. There are gaps in our memories we can't fill, things we've tried to forget but can't shake. It was Christmas Eve 2017. Lisa and I were on our way to her parents' house in Helena, Montana, a good 5-hour drive from Missoula. The forecast warned of snow, but the roads were still clear when we left in the early evening. For the first 2 hours, everything was fine. We listened to Christmas music, sipped on coffee from a gas station thermos, and joked about how her mom always overcooked the ham. The route was quiet, cutting through vast stretches of farmland and forest. The kind of road where you can go miles without seeing another car. Around 9 p.m., we passed through a small town, just a cluster of buildings and a gas station, before turning onto an even lonelier stretch of highway. That's when we saw it. Up ahead, on the side of the road, was a car with its hazard lights flashing. "Should we stop?" Lisa asked, leaning forward to get a better look. I slowed down, the beams of our headlights sweeping over the scene. It was an older sedan, dark blue, parked crookedly on the shoulder. A figure stood beside it, waving frantically. "Yeah," I said, pulling over a few yards ahead. "Looks like they need help." Lisa stayed in the car while I stepped out, pulling my jacket tight against the bitter wind. As I approached, something felt off. The figure, a man in a hooded jacket, didn't move toward me. He just stood there, his arms still raised in that same jerky wave. "Hey, you okay?" I called out, but he didn't respond. I got closer, and that's when I realized the car was empty. The driver's side door was open, but there was no one inside. The man who'd been waving was gone, like he'd vanished into thin air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Jake?" Lisa called from our car. Her voice was muffled by the wind. I turned to answer her and froze. Our car's headlights flickered, then went out completely. The engine sputtered and died, leaving us in total darkness except for the weak, pulsing glow of the abandoned car's hazard lights. "Jake!" Lisa's voice was sharper now, edged with panic. I started back toward her, but before I could reach the car, the radio crackled to life. At first, it was just static, but then I heard something underneath it. A faint, rhythmic murmur, like someone whispering in a language I didn't understand. I yanked open the driver's side door. Lisa was staring at the radio, her face pale, her hands gripping the seatbelt. "What the hell is that?" she whispered. "I don't know." I tried the ignition, but the car wouldn't start. The static grew louder, the whispers weaving through it in a sickening, almost melodic pattern. Then came the lights. It started as a faint glow in the distance, coming from the woods on the other side of the road. At first, I thought it might be headlights, but it was too bright, too white, almost like the glare of a welding torch. The light grew stronger, pulsing in slow, hypnotic waves. "What is that?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said again, though the words felt hollow. The static on the radio spiked, drowning out the whispers with a high-pitched whine that made both of us cover our ears. And then everything went dark. When I came to, I was lying face down in the snow. My head throbbed, and my mouth tasted like metal. I pushed myself up, blinking against the pale morning light. Lisa was next to me, shivering violently. Her coat was gone, and her feet were bare, the skin of her toes red and raw from the cold. "Lisa," I croaked, shaking her shoulder. She stirred, her eyes glassy and unfocused. "Where are we?" she mumbled. I looked around. We were on the side of the highway, but our car was nowhere in sight. In fact, there was nothing in sight. No houses, no signs, just an endless stretch of road cutting through the snow-covered landscape. Hours later, a state trooper found us walking along the highway, dazed and freezing. We told him about the car with the flashing lights, the man on the side of the road, the strange glow in the woods. He didn't believe us. When they recovered our car, it was almost 50 miles from where we'd been found. The battery was dead, but the dashboard camera was still intact. The footage is why I can't sleep at night. The first few minutes show nothing unusual, just the empty highway and the snow blowing past the headlights. Then the screen flickers and the hazard lights from the abandoned car appear. The footage cuts out for a moment, replaced by a bright, blinding flash. When it comes back, there's a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, it's just a silhouette, but as the flashes continue, the figure gets closer, moving in disjointed, almost mechanical bursts. Closer, closer, until all I can see is its face. A pale, featureless oval, filling the screen before the video ends in a burst of static. They told us it was stress, exhaustion, maybe even the early stages of frostbite playing tricks on our minds. But Lisa and I both know what we saw, and sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world feels still, I swear I can hear it, the faint, rhythmic murmur of something I'll never understand. Fifth story, the voice on the radio. Long-haul trucking was a lonely job, but I'd gotten used to it over the years. You have to, especially when the road stretches endlessly through the barren Texas landscape, and there's nothing to keep you company but your own thoughts and whatever's playing on the radio. It was Christmas Eve, 2015, and I was pushing to make it back home to Amarillo in time to see my daughter, Lily, open her presents the next morning. She was 6 then, an age where Christmas still had that special magic. My ex-wife, Heather, had custody, but she'd let me have Lily for the holiday. I didn't want to miss it for the world. The highway was nearly empty, the sky moonless and black. Just me, my Freightliner, and the long stretch of asphalt ahead. Somewhere between Abilene and Sweetwater, I started to feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. I reached for the dial on the radio, hoping some music would help keep me awake. The station I found was perfect old Christmas classics, the kind I grew up with. Bing Crosby, Nat King Cole, Judy Garland. It was comforting, nostalgic, like a warm fire in the middle of the dark, freezing night. But then, between songs, the static came. At first, I thought it was just interference, the signal fading as I got farther from the station's tower. But the crackling grew louder, and then a voice cut through. "James." I froze. The voice was soft, female, and unnervingly clear. "James," she repeated, "are you listening?" My hand tightened on the wheel. I glanced at the radio display, but it just showed the station frequency, nothing unusual. "Who is this?" I said aloud, my voice sounding small in the cab of the truck. There was no answer, just the crackle of static, and then another song started playing. "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." I tried to shrug it off, blaming my tired mind for playing tricks on me. But my grip on the wheel stayed tense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. 10 minutes later, the voice came back. "You need to stop, James," it said, more insistent this time. I swallowed hard, my eyes darting to the rearview mirrors. The highway was still empty, nothing but darkness behind me and ahead. "I don't know who you are," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "But this isn't funny." The voice ignored me. "There's a gas station coming up in 3 miles. You need to pull in there. It's important." "Why?" "Because if you don't, you won't make it home." A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I reached for the dial, twisting it sharply, trying to change the station. The signal crackled and shifted, but no matter where I turned it, the same voice came through. "James," she said, almost pleading now, "please, stop at the gas station." I jabbed the power button, silencing the radio completely. The cab felt eerily quiet without it, the hum of the engine suddenly loud in my ears. But then I heard her again. "Don't do this, James," she said, her voice impossibly clear, as if she were sitting right beside me. "Think about Lily." My chest tightened. Whoever this was, they knew about my daughter. When the gas station came into view, its lights glowing faintly in the distance, I slowed the truck almost instinctively. But then I shook my head, gripping the wheel tighter. This was crazy. Whoever was doing this, it was some kind of sick prank. I didn't have time to play along. Not when Lily was waiting for me. I drove past the station without stopping, watching its lights disappear in my mirrors. The road ahead wound through a series of low hills, the asphalt slick with patches of black ice. I eased up on the accelerator, but my nerves were on edge, my heart racing from the encounter with the voice. And then it happened. As I rounded a sharp curve, the back tires of the truck hit an icy patch. The trailer jackknifed, pulling the cab with it. For a split second, everything seemed to slow down. I yanked the wheel, trying to regain control, but the truck slid sideways, the weight of the trailer dragging it toward the edge of the road. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the sheer drop of the embankment below. When I didn't show up the next morning, Heather called the police. It took them hours to find the wreckage. My truck crumpled at the bottom of the ravine. They said I died on impact, but that's not the end of the story. In the official report, the investigators noted something strange. When they reviewed the dashcam footage from my truck, they heard the voice too, soft, pleading, urging me to stop at the gas station. The station owner later told them that night had been quiet, except for a brief power outage just after I passed by. Heather didn't tell Lily the full story. She said I'd had an accident on my way to see her and that I loved her more than anything in the world. But every Christmas since then, Heather finds something waiting in her mailbox. A cassette tape, the kind you'd use to record radio shows. Each one is labeled the same way. For Lily, love, Dad. And when she plays them, they're always the same. Old Christmas songs, interrupted by a woman's voice. And the voice says, "James should have stopped." Sixth story, The Forgotten Gift. I've told this story to a few people over the years, but most don't believe me. I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't lived through it. Even now, thinking about that night makes my chest tighten and my hands shake. I've tried to move on, but every Christmas Eve, I feel the weight of it all over again. It was December 24th, 2019, and I'd planned a surprise for my boyfriend, Jake. We'd been dating for a year, and he was spending Christmas with his family at their house in rural Pennsylvania, a couple of hours from my place in Pittsburgh. I told him I couldn't make it, family obligations and all that, but the truth was, I'd been planning to drive up that night with a gift and spend Christmas morning with him. It was snowing lightly when I left, the kind of picturesque snowfall that makes everything look like a holiday card. Jake's family lived in an old farmhouse on the edge of a small town, surrounded by woods. It was charming in the daytime, but eerily isolated at night. When I arrived, the house was dark. Not just dark, silent. No lights, no sounds, no sign of life. I parked in the long driveway, my headlights illuminating the front porch. Jake's car was there, along with his parents' SUV, so I knew they were home. I figured they must have gone to bed early, though it seemed strange given Jake had texted me just a couple of hours earlier saying they were staying up late watching Christmas movies. I grabbed the small, carefully wrapped box from the passenger seat and made my way to the front door. It was unlocked. That should have been my first red flag, but I didn't think much of it. This was the kind of town where people left their doors open, trusting their neighbors and the small town quiet. The house was cold when I stepped inside, colder than it should have been. The faint scent of pine lingered in the air, probably from the Christmas tree I'd helped Jake pick out a couple of weeks earlier. "Jake?" I called out, my voice echoing through the stillness. No answer. I walked into the living room, my boots squeaking softly against the hardwood floors. The tree was there, its lights off, but something else caught my eye. A box. It was sitting on the couch, neatly wrapped in shiny red paper with a gold bow. My name was written on the tag in a handwriting I didn't recognize. I froze. The house was dark, silent, empty, yet here was a present with my name on it. My first thought was that Jake had set it up as part of the surprise. Maybe he'd planned something romantic and was hiding upstairs, waiting for me to find it. That had to be it, right? But as I moved closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The box was heavier than I expected. My fingers trembled as I untied the bow and carefully peeled back the paper. Inside was a plain cardboard box, and inside that was a photograph of me, standing in the living room. The picture was recent, too recent. It showed me, just seconds earlier, holding the box in my hands, my expression frozen in shock. Scrawled across the bottom in jagged black letters were two words: "Stay with us." My heart raced as I dropped the box, the photograph fluttering to the floor. "Jake?" I called out again, louder this time. My voice cracked, the panic seeping in. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps creaking on the floorboards above me. I bolted for the door, but when I grabbed the handle, it wouldn't budge. The deadbolt was locked, and the key was nowhere in sight. I tried the back door next, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, but it was the same, locked tight. The footsteps grew louder, descending the staircase. "Jake, this isn't funny," I yelled, my voice trembling. No response. The only sound was the creak of the stairs, one slow step at a time. I grabbed my phone, desperate to call for help, but the screen was black. No matter how many times I pressed the power button, it wouldn't turn on. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the block on the counter. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I stood there, knife in hand, straining to hear anything over the pounding of my heart. Then, from somewhere upstairs, a voice, a whisper. "Emily." I didn't wait to hear more. I locked myself in one of the bedrooms, shoving the dresser against the door. I sat in the corner, clutching the knife, and waited for morning. When the first rays of sunlight broke through the window, I finally worked up the courage to leave. The house was silent again, the air heavy with stillness. The front door was unlocked when I tried it. I didn't stop to question it. I ran to my car, drove straight to the nearest gas station, and called the police. They arrived within the hour and searched the house from top to bottom. There was no sign of Jake or his family. No footprints in the snow except mine. The living room was exactly as I'd left it, except for the box on the couch. Inside was the photograph just as I'd found it. The police couldn't explain it. Jake and his parents were never found. Their cars, their belongings, everything, they just vanished. I spent weeks questioning myself, trying to piece together what happened. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't explain the photograph, or the footsteps, or the whisper that called my name. Every Christmas since, I felt like someone is watching me. I keep my doors locked, my phone charged, and my lights on all night. But every now and then, I swear I hear footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, and sometimes, just as I'm falling asleep, I hear it again. "Stay with us." 7th story, The Messenger. We hadn't been back to the old house in years. Clara and I used to joke that we'd leave that chapter of our lives buried, just like our parents. The place held too many memories, some sweet, but most too heavy to carry. Yet, on Christmas Eve of 2014, a mix of nostalgia and foolish curiosity pulled us back. "It's probably falling apart by now," Clara said as we drove through the winding back roads of New Hampshire, the tires crunching on frost-covered gravel. "Yeah," I muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. "But it's Christmas, right? Time for traditions." She shot me a look. "This is a terrible tradition." She wasn't wrong. The house sat at the end of a narrow, overgrown path, surrounded by skeletal trees that seemed to close in as we approached. The porch sagged under its own weight, and the windows gaped like empty eye sockets. It had been abandoned for over a decade, ever since our parents' sudden deaths. The town rumors didn't help. Stories of strange lights and whispers in the night had circulated for years, but no one ever stayed long enough to confirm them. "Are we seriously doing this?" Clara asked as I pushed open the rusted gate. "We've come this far," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of damp wood and mildew. Our footsteps echoed on the warped floorboards, a stark contrast to the warmth I remembered as a kid. The walls were bare, save for the faded outlines where picture frames had once hung. "This place is worse than I thought," Clara said, brushing cobwebs off her jacket. We wandered the rooms, pointing out where the Christmas tree used to stand, where our dad would sit and carve wooden toys, where our mom's laughter used to fill the air. But in the dining room, we found something that didn't belong. An envelope sat on the dusty table, its edges yellowed with age. It was sealed with red wax, and our names, Ethan and Clara, were written in looping, old-fashioned script. Clara frowned, holding it up to the dim light. "Did you do this?" I shook my head, my chest tightening. "No. Why would I?" She broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was brittle, the handwriting elegant but hurried. Started with a line that made my blood run cold. "To my dearest Ethan and Clara, if you are reading this, then I am already gone." The letter claimed to be from our father, but it didn't make any sense. It spoke of a brother we'd never known, our Uncle Andrew, who had apparently lived in the house with them when we were young. "He was dangerous," the letter read. "We tried to protect you from him, but he always found a way back. If you ever return to this house, you must leave immediately. It is not safe. Andrew never left." The rest of the letter was incoherent, rambling about shadows and locked doors. "I don't remember an Uncle Andrew," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Neither do I," I whispered, but something deep inside me churned. Memories, fragmented and hazy, started to surface. A man's laugh, a locked room upstairs, our mother's voice raised in anger. The first sound came as we finished the letter, a faint creak from upstairs. Clara and I froze. "It's just the wind," I said, though even I didn't believe it. Then came the slam of a door. Clara grabbed my arm. "Ethan, we need to go." "Wait," I said, staring up the dark staircase. A part of me, some irrational part, needed to know if Andrew was real, if the house really held the secrets our parents had kept from us. I took a step toward the stairs. "Don't," Clara hissed. But then the whispering started. It was faint at first, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. But as we stood there, it grew louder, a chorus of voices layered over one another. Clara grabbed my arm, dragging me toward the front door. "We're leaving. Now!" We stumbled out into the freezing night, the cold air burning our lungs. Behind us, the house seemed to hum with energy, its dark windows glowing faintly in the moonlight. I didn't stop until we reached the car. By morning, the storm had passed, and we returned with the police. But when we arrived, the house was gone. Not just empty, gone. In its place was a barren lot, covered in snow and scattered with the rotting remains of a foundation. "It was demolished years ago," the officer said, looking at us like we were crazy. Clara and I exchanged a look, the letter crumpled in her pocket like proof of our shared insanity. Months passed. We tried to move on, but the memory of that night lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us, a shadow lingering just beyond the edges of my vision. Then, in the spring, Clara called me. She sounded shaken. "Ethan, I got another envelope." "What?" "It's the same one," she said, her voice trembling. "The same wax seal, the same handwriting." "What does it say?" There was a pause before she answered. "Do you remember me?" I haven't seen Clara since that call. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Andrew ever really left the house, or if he found a new one.